where I am or told. So welcome everyone to the Good Health and Wellness Community Health webinar for March. Thank you all for joining us today. Our webinar today is titled Embracing Traditional Foods to Prevent Chronic Diseases. And our presenter today is Sue McLaughlin. She's a registered dietitian nutritionist, licensed medical nutrition therapist, as well as a certified diabetes care and education specialist. She does work with the Good Health and Wellness program with the Tribal Practices for Good Health and Wellness in Indian Country project with the Winnebago tribe of Nebraska. I will hand it over to Sue soon, and she can introduce herself more thoroughly, but just a few items before we get started with the presentation today. I do want to point out that everyone is muted and videos are turned off for the time being, but you can ask questions throughout the webinar using the chat box or also the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screens. So please feel free to ask any questions you have along the way, and we will be answering all questions and comments at the end of the webinar. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to our YouTube page will be sent out in the follow-up email where you can view this webinar again, as well as the slides and contact information for us and Sue. So with that being said, I will go ahead and turn it over to Sue and we can get started. Thanks so much, Sue.
All right. Thank you, Shannon. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And it's my honor and privilege to get to be with you today, and certainly to be part of working with tribal communities. I have worked in Winnebago now. It's going on, I think, 15 years off and on. I had a little break in there. I traveled up from Omaha, Nebraska. It's about an hour and a half north of Omaha, several times a week, as well as doing some remote work, and have just been so blessed to be a part of the community, to be embraced by the community. And so I have some, one of the things that we're really excited about here in Winnebago is just really promoting healthy lifestyle habits. And of course, as we all know, nutrition is a big part of that. And so we're going to go through a variety of things today with you. I hope you'll find something here that maybe is new to you, or that you feel of it will help you with a different way to look at what you're doing already in your communities, and maybe a new thing to try. So Shannon has graciously agreed to advance the slides for me. So we're going to communicate back and forth with that. And I'm going to let her know when I need the next one, and then we'll move forward. So thank you so much. And Shannon, please go ahead and move to the next one. So as you know, March is National Nutrition Month, and one of the things that is really exciting in tribal communities is how much different communities have embraced this opportunity to really bring a good focus to nutrition, and recognizing that it is a part of our overall health and lifestyle, and preventing disease and medical conditions from occurring to future generations, as well as to the current ones. Next slide, please. So National Nutrition Month, I should say, go back, sorry, Shannon. National Nutrition Month actually was birthed, so to speak, in 1973 by the American Dietetic Association. And then National Nutrition Week started in 1977. And I just thought it was kind of fun to see the logo, and something that we registered dietitians, those of us that have been practicing long enough, we're familiar with. NutriBird, as you see on the right hand side of the screen, was this kind of quirky little bird that was to signify that it would be good for all of us to eat a balanced diet every day, not just during, of course, the month of March or during National Nutrition Week. So actually this was something I started practice a little bit after this, but it was still going until the early 1980s. And then they decided it was kind of a frivolous thing. So you no longer see NutriBird, but the idea still goes on. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we are doing here in Winnebago. Every March, we have some type of activity or activities. And so, Shannon, can you move to the next one? There we go. Yeah, so this just shows a couple of them, the activities here in Winnebago. In 2020, before we all got locked down, we actually had a poker walk here, and we ended up doing it in the Whirling Thunder Wellness Center gym. And so we had several stations, and people could walk around, and once they then had stopped at the stations and received some piece of education, then they were eligible for different prizes and whatnot. And then this year we are doing a no soda challenge. And so both of these activities, and a lot of them, are actually come under the guidance of our diabetes program. And Mary Kelsey, some of you might know her. She is our tribal nutrition specialist, who is incredibly creative and just comes up with something new and wonderful multiple times a year. And so she, I believe, is responsible for this one as well this year. We're trying to help reduce intake of course, soda. And so this is what came up, and people can participate throughout the month of March, and then will be eligible for some type of incentive if they take part in taking the pledge and cutting back on soda intake. So again, thanks to Mary. She's a great friend, and I know that you see her number there. I know that she's always glad to share ideas with you. Next slide, please. So these are the things that I hope to cover in the next so many minutes, just to go over why traditional foods diets are so important and healthy for all of us, and how they actually can not only address any kind of medical issues that we might be having now, but to help prevent, again, those things from affecting our children or grandchildren. And then just some guidance about, some tips about shopping and preparing foods. Some of them may not be new to you, but we'll kind of talk about those, and maybe that'll spur some ideas for you as well. Next slide, please. So what is chronic disease? If you have looked this up, done much checking of this on the web at different sites, you find that there are actually, there's a little bit of difference of opinion in terms of what we should define as a chronic disease. This actually, as you see here, comes from the CDC, and they have termed it as a condition that lasts 1 year or more, and it requires ongoing medical attention or limits the activities of daily living, or both. And we know in the US that it is a problem. 6 in 10 adults have at least one chronic disease, and 4 in 10 have 2 or more. And you see examples of chronic diseases listed there: heart disease, cancer, chronic lung disease, stroke, Alzheimer's, diabetes, and chronic kidney disease. And that is not, unfortunately, all inclusive. Next slide, please. So the leading offenders are heart disease and stroke, cancer, diabetes, lung disease, and actually the leading causes of death and disability. So not only, causing us to lose loved ones early, but causing the time on this earth to potentially be very uncomfortable and hurtful, and to cause challenges for everyone, of course, in the family. So that's, the personal most important part. But we do know as well that any of these chronic diseases also cost our nation more in terms of care, and it's significant. So these are general figures for the entire US, but as we know, in Indian country, they are magnified. So we want to say, what can we do to help address them and to change the path to a more positive one? Next slide. So this is information, and I'm sure you've looked before. This is from American Heart Association, who is, of course, one of the experts on heart disease and stroke. And looking at the things that contribute to causing problems: high blood pressure, high cholesterol. Of course, one of the things that over the years has been less well recognized, is the impact of high blood glucose and how much that impacts blood vessels and heart disease. So anyone that ends up having some type of heart problem, blood vessel problem, whether it's a heart attack or whether it's affecting the cerebral area and the brain, being a stroke, that comes in part from poor glucose control, as well as the high blood pressure and the high cholesterol. Any of those things are causing inflammation in our bodies and therefore make the blood vessels and the whole vascular system be more at risk for injury. So all of these things are tied together. We all know that smoking and even being exposed to second smoke will increase our risk, as well as obesity, an unhealthy diet, and physical inactivity. Next slide, please. Cancer as well affects a lot of our families. We know that every year that more than 1.7 million people are diagnosed with cancer. 600,000 die from it. And so it is considered now to be the leading cause of death. And again, not only the personal issues that we have to deal with, but also it's a high cost to all of us in the pocketbook as well. Next slide. Diabetes, my area of expertise. I've been a diabetes educator for 30 years now. I do have a lot of type 2 diabetes in my family. My husband does as well. So hit by it individually. And we also now are aware of pre-diabetes. And we know that in our communities that that is impacting people as well. Fortunately, we've got some programs to address that so that hopefully we can keep people from moving on to type 2. But again, as I said a moment ago, diabetes causes serious complications, including heart disease, kidney failure, and blindness. And so a lot of sadness and challenges related to that. Next slide, please. So then continuing on, also tobacco use and exposure to secondhand smoke, as I mentioned, poor nutrition and diets that are low in fruits and veggies and high in salt and sodium and saturated fats, or both, contribute to the incidence and prevalence of chronic diseases. Also, lack of physical activity and excessive alcohol intake will also contribute. Next slide. So poor nutrition encompasses many things. It goes from birth to the end of life. And we know that in spite of our good efforts to help infants get off on the right foot, that we still need to embrace that more effectively. And currently, about 1 in 4 infants is exclusively breastfed through 6 months of age. We know that a number of children too are impacted by iron deficiency, as are a number of pregnant women. So I know in the screenings that we do here in Winnebago every year for Educare, we are also always looking to see if our kiddos are iron deficient. And a number of homes in communities, of course, have a high lead count due to their water supply or to the lead paint. So we're always looking to be sure that we are meeting the needs of anyone that might be anemic related to potentially lead exposure, and being sure that we address that. We also know that poor nutrition encompasses a high intake of sodium, which of course adds to the chances for developing high blood pressure, and then of course heart disease, and again just putting a challenge on our blood vessels. We also know that fewer than 1 in 10 US adults and adolescents eat enough fruits and veggies. So that's something that we're all trying to encourage. And then we know that on the other end of the scale, that many of our family members are engaging in consuming sugary drinks. And so what we're doing is replacing nutrient-dense foods, as in fruits and veggies, lean meats, with nutrient-sparse foods, as in sugary drinks. So something that we all want to help change the numbers on that. Next slide, please. We know that overweight is a challenge for many of our families. We know that it's starting very young. And so again, this contributes to chronic diseases. And any of us that have had challenges with our weight know that we certainly don't care to have it, and it's not easy to overcome, but that working together, we can provide some programming that will help people to reverse the course on that as well. Next slide, please. So this is a statement that I really like by the World Health Organization, because the things that we're talking about, of course, are not specific to only our tribal communities or to the US, but they're actually, unfortunately occur throughout the world. And what we do know is that we have genetic influences, we each do, but that's part of the equation, but not the entire equation. And so, our genetics can be really parts that we just want to embrace, and we're so pleased with. But then on the other hand, there's also the part of what we can do, given those genetics being wonderful or not so wonderful, and making changes in our lifestyle to really make a difference as much as we can do. Next slide, please. So as I said, the stats that we looked at in the prevalence and incidence were throughout not only the US, but the world, but we know that they hit Indian country particularly hard. And that, 100 years or so ago, these chronic diseases weren't here. People were much more active, had access to traditional foods that were so healthy. They were high in fiber, they were low in fat, they had the right type of fat in them. It was the diet that was available, and that is what people ate. And as we've culture and society has moved on for a number of reasons, unfortunately, in Indian country, that has changed. And we are more mobile in many cases. We have access to so many choices in many cases. In many cases, we don't. In many cases, there are limited stores to purchase food from in communities. And so people are forced to either shop at convenience marts or to find transportation to get them to larger stores. But at those larger stores, they also contain a lot of processed foods and many, many choices that are very hard for any of us to resist at times. We also know that there's more than just what is or is not accessible in terms of product. It's also what is our approach to that, and how do we deal with food choices, and what are the other things impacting our families? So levels of anxiety, food scarcity, food insecurity. How do I work through coping with challenging situations? Many of us have dealt with eating as a method of coping, and eating too much or choosing the wrong types of food. So all those things go into what our diet is like, which has a big part of determining whether or not we develop chronic diseases in the future. So next slide, please. But we're going to focus on solutions, right? So there are a number of great programs that we have in tribal communities. Some of you, I'm sure, have been a part of the Wise Woman program that was really to help us women, those of us on the call, to understand and to reduce the risk for heart disease and stroke by promoting, again, healthy lifestyle choices. Many of us, I was fortunate to be part of the SDPI program back in 2006 to 2012, and being part of our prediabetes program, our Ho-Chunk program here in Winnebago. And so that, what you see on the right-hand side of the slide is how significant that was to helping to decrease movement on to type 2 diabetes, and to diabetes-related deaths, and to kidney failure and eye disease and hospitalizations, all those great outcomes that came when we were able to embrace members of the community in these programs. And we move on, we're moving on with tribal practices and with the great Plains programs, and many others that are fortunately more than I'm going to have time to mention here. But thank goodness that we have, we can see that when we have the funding to help move these programs into communities, they truly can make a difference. Next slide, please. So I'm going to share with you on the next couple slides just some nutrition recommendations from the American Heart, American Cancer, and American Diabetes Association. And they're pretty brief, but what we're going to find is that their components are supportive of each other, and really then in our messaging to our communities are really guiding us in the same direction. I think over years, each organization has sometimes had mixed messages, or when we're trying to help our family members and people that we work with understand this, it feels like we're constantly having to, spin a number of plates, or, well, this one says this, and this one says this, and this association says this. And it can be really challenging for people then, especially when you've got a number of folks in your family or your wider community that are dealing with different chronic disease. And how do I put that all together to make it be healthy for all of us, so that, whomever's cooking at home or whomever is shopping is not having to have, a long list of, for this family member, this one and this one, competing guidelines. So that is an encouraging part of the guidance that we get from these organizations, that truly their guidance is based on evidence. So they are looking at not only, input from tribal communities, but populations as a whole in the country. And what does the research show us is going to be beneficial, and basing it on that so that we truly can use that to make recommendations for people in our families or people that we work with. Next slide, please. So this first one is American Heart Association, and this is actually very recent guidance from them. This came out just in 2021. And actually what you can see on the left-hand side of the screen are those things that we all know to emphasize. Very much, they are traditional foods, fruits and veggies in the region that we're in, whole grain foods, wild rice, corn, those types of things, healthy sources of protein, fish that's currently in our areas, whatever that might be. Dairy, and, traditionally was not part, obviously, of a lot of tribes. However, with those tribes that ended up, farming, as many of us do here in this part of the country, then that's another thing that was, you had animals that would provide you with dairy as well, and thus the calcium that comes from that. Poultry, wild running game would certainly fit in that. This continues to be so healthy. Bison and other wild game. And then plant oil, so then all the nuts and seeds and those types of things that have been available to tribes in this area certainly fit within this American Heart Association guideline. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, we see, of course, the processed foods. And so no matter where we are, the more processing that occurs, the more additives, the more sodium, the more sugar, the more calories that a person is going to take in. So obviously that needs to be on the lighter end of the scale. And then, of course, depending on the person's needs, how active they are, where they are in the growth, their pattern for growth, if they're a growing child, or if it's a pregnant woman, or if somebody has undergone, some type of treatment for cancer, for example, or has some other injury, or is recovering from a surgery, then that's going to impact if they have particular nutrient needs that they need. Next slide, please. And so this one is from American Cancer Society. And again, what you see is more fruits and veggies, more fiber-rich beans and peas, whole grains, red meats that are lean and less processed, sugar sweetened beverages, we want to cut back on those, and any other kind of processed items. And then it also, in their guidance, they recommend how much is appropriate for alcohol intake. Many times people will choose abstinence, which is certainly, a great choice. But for those who do choose to drink, it gives guidelines on the right-hand side. And I was just sharing this with a member of my family not too long ago, saying, one drink it's a specific amount that you want to think about for that. One drink doesn't mean no matter how big the container is, or two drinks doesn't mean no matter how big the container is. So look at that if you do choose to include alcohol in your lifestyle. But again, it's reinforcement of many things that we saw from the American Heart Association. And then on the next slide is from the American Diabetes Association. And American Diabetes Association does not have the infographics like the other two organizations do. But, we're familiar with the plate. Non-starchy veggies, needs to be half of our plates, along with about a quarter being more carb dense foods and protein foods that are lean as well. And then, of course, encouraging the people to drink more water or 0-calorie drinks. So again, reinforcement by all three organizations. Next slide, please. Okay, and then here we are to the native plate, which again reinforces everything that we've seen on the other slides, trying to have half our plate be low carb veggies. Again, the more color that we can put into our diets, the more antioxidants, the more then encompassing that, the more vitamins and minerals that we're going to get, which overall is just going to help to decrease inflammation and then to decrease the chances of chronic disease. You see water there on the right-hand side, lean meats of any type, or fish, chicken, beef, whatever it may be, pork, and then rice. And again, any kind of whole grains that we can get into the diet are going to be preferable. Next slide, please. So, what would a presentation be without a quiz? So what we have here is, this is something that we have used in the community here in a variety of ways. We've used with kids, I've used it with seniors, all the way in between at health fairs and those types of things. But if you haven't done this in your own travel area, we just went through and I talked with the elders and tried to be as inclusive as I could about the foods that were here when either, they were children or their grandparents were there, and we put those together. So you see a number of traditional foods, but you also see, of course, some that are very processed and of course are not traditional. But we've used this with the teenagers as well, just to kind of be an aha, or maybe not an aha, but a recognition of the great disparity between a Red Bull, for example, and to have I don't have tea on here, but a number of healthy foods. So on the next slide, if you go to that one, Shannon, then we have the listing that shows all the traditional foods on the left-hand two columns, and then the non-traditional foods on the right-hand. So the non-traditional ones in this case are also ones that, excuse me, are not in this part of the country. But so just to help people identify those, excuse me, just 1 minute. Okay, next slide, please. So this is actually, on these next two slides, these are actually, on the left hand, you see the traditional food, sorry. And on the right, you see the nutrients that those foods are high in. And in a number of these, of course, the types of meat or fish, you're going to see protein listed as first, as well as being a good source of iron, niacin, B vitamins. And then also you see, like if you look here under trout and walleye, you see in particular those native fishes that are really high in omega-3 fatty acids. And those, as you know, are ones that are really promoted now, that we all try and take in, whether it's local fish or whether we're fortunate enough to get some also like salmon or something from other parts of the country, that we include those in our diets as much as we can, because we know that those, again, are heart healthy and have been shown to decrease inflammation and then to decrease our risk for chronic diseases. as you move into the apples and the berries, you find that, and then on the next slide too, we're going to find listing of antioxidants. So again, any foods that are going to be more brilliant in color are going to also include more antioxidants and more minerals. Next slide, please. And then there you see black walnuts, another thing that is a native food for this area. And again, omega-3 fatty acids, you see all of those minerals as well, potassium and magnesium that make a difference in terms of muscles, conduction within the muscles. So that means our heart, how is our heart beating appropriately when we're building bodies of our kids or grandkids. If family members are short on any of these things for whatever reason, then the bodybuilding that should occur in the muscle and the bones and everything else is going to be less than we would hope that it would be. So you can use these things. And like I say, I know that all of these foods are probably not found in all of our communities, but it would, give you a guidance for talking with other family members and friends about the reasons really why our traditional diet is so much healthier for all of us. And these particular slides, I'm also using in working with our prenatal population here. And I know milkweed, mahich is, and I'll probably pronounce that wrong as I usually do, but I know that has some properties. It was used a lot in the past, and it still is by some families. But what I have read anyway is that it is not recommended that it be included in the diet of pregnant women or breastfeeding women, because there are some parts of that can be toxic. So just a concern to watch for that. And I don't know if in past years, if that was something that was okay in previous generations, but I wanted to put that warning on there for you all. Next slide, please. So here in Winnebago, I am again truly blessed. I am part of our food sovereignty task force, and that was started back in 2018. Our tribal council approved it moving forward, and we have tremendous input and engagement by really pretty much every entity in this community. So we have our farms, we have the wildlife and parks program, we have Educare, we have the school, we have our extension office, we have Ho-Chunk Inc., we have all the partners there, we have the diabetes program that are really, we meet monthly and we work together to look at how we can help the Winnebago community become truly food sovereign. This is a whole nother talk that we can do, and I've done with other members, of course, here in the community, but just are really proud about how much we have worked within the community, and the community has really worked with us to help work toward becoming food sovereign. Next slide, please. And so here are just a couple of the partners that we have within our program. As I mentioned, several years ago, we started our own farmers market because of COVID, of course. It's been a little slow to get going as much as we'd like, but we're continuing on. And we have a lovely building that where actually we can have classes inside of the building. We also have a large covering where people can sign up to bring their produce, as well as to have, if they have gone through the approved Safe Serve class, they can also have food products, they can have crafts, all of those types of things there whenever weekly we do our farmers market. And then on the left-hand side of the screen, you also see the garden boxes. So several years ago, we also started the Bago Grows with having community members order whatever type of box they wanted to have in their yard, and then they can start, we're encouraging people to start their own garden. And then we also at the extension office have virtual classes, and then in person now, hopefully, where people can sign up and get equipment to be able to can, to learn how to can if they haven't done that. We also have purchased food dryers, so that, again, another great traditional food, so people can learn how to dry fruit and veggie, fruit and meat and whatever, and have that in their homes. Next slide, please. And then here is the boxes that, and this is a form that people could, again, choose whether they wanted a raised planter or this poly raised bed, or the box that you see on the bottom. And then through the extension office and Little Priest Community College and our farmers market coordinator worked on helping get these delivered to people and getting them set up in their homes. So it was fabulous. Next slide, please. So now we're going to move into the other part of just how we can eat right. So, and then prevent chronic disease. And so I've got several tips. Like I say, some of these are probably something that are not new to you, but maybe it'll just remind you of something that you haven't tried for a while, because certainly, as we know, food supply chains challenges, as well as, you know, because of that, prices going up, inflation, food costs are going up. And so the more that we can embrace traditional diets, and the more that we can have food grown in the community that we can share with others, we're going to help, you know, prevent chronic disease in that way. So the first thing sounds pretty straightforward, but actually it's kind of surprising how many of us maybe have not gone through this process of setting up a plan for a budget for the week. So things to consider, we actually have, and I'm glad to share all these things with you guys, we have a form that we've shared that helps you to kind of plot out, okay, who's going to be doing the shopping this week for the family, who's going to be cooking, who's going to be helping with the prep, how many, you know, activities do the kids have or the grandkids have, are we planning to have someone else over, so I need to prepare on the weekend for having double the number of family members that I usually have. All those kinds of things that in the planning ahead, then we can help to save on our food dollar and our out of pocket, because we have thought ahead on being sure that we have enough, but that we're not also over purchasing, so that we actually waste food. Next slide, please. So how much to make? I know some families are probably more into leftovers than others. I happen to be one of those families that is into leftovers. So how can we look at using a food item, you know, such as maybe we're going to have, I don't know, maybe we're fortunate enough we're going to have a buffalo roast at the beginning of the week. And then, but how can we use the leftover to use in a soup toward the end, or a casserole or something like that? Another great way to, if you have family members that are somewhat averse to veggies, or little ones that the flavor seems way too strong, you know, including those leftover, whatever, the broccoli, and putting it into a casserole, you know, putting it in with mac and cheese that you know that they'll eat. So pairing the foods that are less favorite with some of the ones that you know the person will eat, and then you kind of get that flavor combo that then you can help people to move toward eating that more often, or discovering something that they thought they disliked, and in actuality, it might be pretty tasty. Next slide, please. So where and when we will shop. When we will shop is really important, because if we have just finished working, or we've just finished picking up the kids, or we are need to get from work to a game that they're involved with, or whatever kind of activity, that is obviously not the best time for any of us to shop, because we are tired, perhaps a bit hypoglycemic, and we will grab whatever will give an immediate satisfaction or an immediate answer to what we think is a true hunger and can't wait. So as much as you can, one of the things is to try to not shop when we're hungry. I always used to say, I'm fortunate enough to have 4 children. I used to say that I was not going to take the children with me because I would have more things in my cart, but sometimes you have no other choice and they go. But if you've got a list and you've got a plan and you know what you're going to say to the children in terms of what they can choose, guide them, and you can choose this or that. That will also help not only put healthier things in your cart, but also help you in controlling the amount that you're putting out when you're purchasing. Comparing prices online, we're fortunate that if you live in a place where you can go to a, for example, here in Winnebago, we have Hy-Vee stores that are not too far away that you can order ahead and then you can just pick up. That can also help because the controlled access to many different choices going in front of our faces or our family members' faces can also help to control not only the health of the choice, but also how expensive it is. Next slide, please. So again, coming back to shopping for foods in season, certainly taking the opportunity to participate in farmers markets and to start your own garden if you can. And on this one, I think, again, another teaching opportunity for the kids. Even if you just haven't before, but purchase a small pot and then have them start their own cherry tomatoes or whatever it is that their herb, whatever it's going to be, that they can just be proud of starting with that, and then they can share that at the table for the meal, so that again you're reinforcing this is a lifelong choice and this is what is going to be so healthy for your body. Just putting that in practice can be really be rewarding for them personally, and then as well for their health in the years to come. Next slide, please. So use canned or frozen if we can't get fresh. Again, I would come back to now, another thing I'm going to talk about my friend Mary Kelsey again, who is at Whirling Thunder. She does freezer meals, and fortunately, so then families can come in and then the ingredients are there, they put things together, and they can freeze that, and the recipes for healthy meals are there, so people can just pull that out and they don't have to worry about, do I have the spices I need, or do I have this ingredient or whatever. So think about, maybe even if it's not a formal thing, if you haven't done this, getting together, maybe it's once a month or whatever with other families, and purchasing together, or just sharing the things that you get out of the garden or from a farmer's market, so that you can really think forward on that as well. And again, as I mentioned, our extension office has done classes on canning and drying. And so it's all something that if you haven't had the opportunity to learn from other family members or from elders, and that it's a great opportunity to just share knowledge, not only about the food, of course, but just about family traditions. So think about that. Next slide, please. So focus on nutrition and low cost foods, right? Well, that's pretty straightforward, I guess. But again, having a plan so that when you go into the store, you order online, that you have, the must-have items, and then you have nice-to-have items. And think about, again, from the educational standpoint, again, with other family members and what other family members have in terms of chronic illnesses. And so it's both the meeting the needs for treatment for a chronic illness, lower sodium, lower fat, controlled carb, higher fiber, higher nutrient dense. It's not only that, but it's also the prevention about our bodies, our biological units that need to be fed as high quality product as we can possibly give them. Next slide, please. Portion sizes are important too. We all know that, right? But even again, a plan. So, and I talk about this a lot with parents and grandparents. Many times, just because we have busy lives and because we as parents or grandparents are in charge of purchasing and preparing the food for the most part. Sometimes we serve our kids without thinking about them having smaller stomachs and how much do they really need. I'm one of those that grew up with Clean Your Plate Club. So at that time, food was put on my plate and the expectation was to not waste, which I still am a believer in that, but I was expected to finish my plate, whether it had the right amount or it had twice the amount that I needed. So our jobs as parents and grandparents and other family members, adults, is to provide healthy choices, but then to let kids choose age appropriate amounts. And you can help with that by using smaller plates and bowls and glasses, so they feel in control and they feel like it is an appropriate amount for them. And then it also helps when we purchase a course enough that is enough, but not too much. If we have coupons or we go to a store that's a box store like a Costco or someplace that's got you can buy large quantities at one time, that can be great if you've got the family that needs more like that. But if there are only a couple of you in the house at the time or during your buying period, then you might end up finding that either things expire or they deteriorate so that you can't eat them before you get to the time you're going to use them, or maybe you don't have enough freezer space to freeze them. So think about what you really can use so that it isn't wasted, because then it's a double whammy on the food budget, and then you're like me, you feel guilty that you didn't use that food. So just a couple things to think about. Next slide, please. Make your own healthy snacks. And I do have a slide coming up that gives some suggestions for that. But the amount of money that we all can save by taking our lunch, thinking ahead, packing our kids' lunches, if that's appropriate, or just thinking through having the healthy snacks in our homes and bagging them up. If it's on your food budget, it makes more sense to buy in bulk. Bag them up so that they're in the right portion and they are healthy choices for the kids or other family members. Next slide, please. Again, pretty straightforward. Cook more, eat out less, take out less. So again, busy families, busy lives, kids and grandkids doing many activities. This can be a more realistic goal, and sometimes it's less, but come back to, I would advise, to what can I do here? Maybe the whole meal is not going to be from the garden or in the crock pot or in the air fryer or made from home, but what parts of it can I do? And maybe I can, sometimes I'm going to have to supplement. Sometimes there's just no choice. We're going to need to eat out, or we're going to need to grab a fast food meal or bring something home. But as much as we can, if you can do more that is less processed and more traditional foods, unprocessed, that are going to be higher in the good nutrients, that's the way to go. Next slide. So now in the next several slides, I've just got some other positive messages that we have used here in this community. And so just some ideas that I thought might be fun for you all to share with you all. Next slide. So one of the things that we use, and this goes back to what Mary's got for our National Nutrition Month theme here, this is one of the things we used at Educare. So we provided the parents and grandparents with this home beverage inventory, and just to really look and see where do we fall in terms of healthier choices such as milk or V8 juice or water compared to some of these either higher sugar, higher caffeine, alcoholic beverages. And so this is something you might think about. We found too with our kiddos that many times parents and grandparents knew that the fruit flavored drinks or the sodas were ones to avoid and limit, but they weren't aware, and this is several years ago, of fruit juice. And so fruit juice, I have a guideline for, again, a teaching material that we used with families, but fruit juice seems like it might be good because it does have vitamins and minerals in it. However, the calories and the carb are just the same as if someone were drinking regular soda. And we found that a lot of our kiddos have been drinking a lot of their calories, and then that contributes to them filling up and then not feeling like eating the healthier food choices, or it can also contribute to the caloric intake, and so they end up being above the 85th percentile in weight. And so then we need to address that. Next slide, please. So this is another teaching tool that you could use, just showing what's the sugar content in these, everything from energy drinks, Gatorade, Powerade, regular soda, you know, coffee and tea, as well as what I call the foo-foo drinks, the frappuccinos and macchiatos and all those types of things. And then things like bug juice, and then of course water. So again, caffeine content also varies, as do calories. Next slide, please. So here's the teaching tool that we have used here in Winnebago. These are based on the 2017 American Academy of Pediatrics recommendations for juice. And so you can see here that actually they recommend that for children less than 12 years old, or 12 months old, sorry, that they actually do not have any juice unless it's been clinically indicated, you know, unless there's been some kind of a situation where maybe there's a dehydration issue and you need to be replacing, you know, because of diarrhea or some type of illness, and you're advised that you need to increase intake of electrolytes, then that might be a case where you're advised to do that. For toddlers 1 through 3 years, 4 ounces per day. Kids 4 through 6, limit to 4 to 6 ounces. And then actually beyond that, limit juice to 8 ounces per day. So even in the older children, it's recommended that we limit how much juice they're taking in. Next slide, please. And then we talk about, of course, drinking more water, that our bodies are a high percentage of water. And so that we need it. We need it for muscle function, for organ function, for joint function. Everything needs to have water. And so that is the ideal drink. And so then we move into, okay, but how do I access that? Is the water supply that I have without, you know, lead? Is it without a taste that's going to be averse to someone drinking it? And how can we then help our kids and all of us to just, when we're thirsty, to grab water? Another thing that is applies to all of this discussion is that in terms of our food choices, many times what research has shown is that when any of us think we are hungry, we're actually thirsty. So what we need to try first is to take in some fluid, take in some water, give it a minute to get absorbed, and say, was I really hungry for that snack or whatever, or was it just that I needed a drink? And so again, proactive on the water intake and being sure that we have that accessible to our community and as we're on the road. Next slide, please. And then this is a slide that just talks about healthy snacks. Are they, you know, try and have them made at home. Are they nutrient dense? Are they things that are high in antioxidants like fruits and veggies would be? Are they high in protein like something like peanut butter or nuts would be? Or yogurt, maybe Greek yogurt in particular? Have we limited the processing of those so that they're lower in salt and sodium, sugar, and saturated fats? A general guideline is to contain 1 or 2 food groups. So, you know, if we grab for a regular soda, there are no food groups there. If we grab for peanut butter and banana, or, you know, crackers that are whole grain, or, you know, variety of things that we all can think of, try and have a couple food groups there, maybe yogurt with berries in it. Is it something that will be beneficial instead of doing harm to our body? And is it reasonable in size? And so you can say that somewhere between 100 and 200 calories is what we'd probably classify as a snack. When you get over that, you're really excuse me, talking a mini meal. And then that needs to be evaluated as well. Excuse me a minute. So does that snack really fit within my overall diet and contribute to that healthy lifestyle? Next slide, please. So I really like this. I don't know who Doug Larson is, but being in the community and knowing that bacon bacon many times is part of a family's traditional intake, so to speak. I thought this was very cute. If life expectancy would grow by leaps and bounds if green veggies just smelled as good as bacon does, right? Okay, and lastly, the last slide, please. So thank you for your attention. I hope that you've had something here that you can use in your community. Again, I am so pleased to be embraced by the Winnebago community and by the Great Plains region. It's truly been just one of the best parts of my life to be working here and to learning here. And I hope that all of you stay safe and be healthy, and think about, planting your own garden or going to that farmer's market if you haven't, and indulging the family members, and we can all learn from each other. So thank you, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you so much, Sue. That was a lot of great information. We thank you so much for coming on and doing your presentation today. If anyone has any questions for Sue, we can answer those now. You can, again, use the chat or the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screens. I'm just checking the chat now. I don't see any questions, but just a comment that that someone always heard that Kool-Aid was better than other processed drinks.
It's still going to have about the same sugar and calories. I mean, it's going to be a little bit less maybe than some that are more concentrated, but I think you bring up a good question, because if you, and the same thing goes for juice. A lot of times, if your family member is used to that sweet taste, then you may have to dilute it down to move them over to getting away from it. So that's something that I've talked with families too about is, if you're putting a full 8 ounces of juice in a sippy cup right now, then, do half water and help move your child or grandchild toward getting away from that. Because we do, they say, when we're infants, we like that taste of sweet, and we don't do as well with the taste of bitter like you find in a lot of veggies. So it is a process. So I think that's the message, is moving toward a healthier choice is probably going to be more realistic than cold turkey, doing cold turkey in some situations. So good question.
Great, thank you.